Hello, welcome to the GPP Chin Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42 here with Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life, and we are talking about a bunch of GPP plays that we like at every position for both FanDuel and DraftKings for tonight's huge slate. Once again, 15 games, so we're going to go ahead and get things going here in a second. You ready, Scott?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, so we're going to start off. We're going to go position by position here and give you our take on each spot. And at pitcher, there's a lot of guys that I like for GPPs today. Not a ton of guys I feel comfortable about in cash, but that's perfect for this situation because we're talking about GPPs. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and give you a pitcher that I'm looking at a lot tonight in GPPs, and you give me your take, and then give me some guys that you like as well. I like Andrew Cashner against the Dodgers. He's $8,800. A lot of things make him a great GPP play today. People won't be playing him because they will be playing Zach Greinke. He is pitching at home again at Petco. He had a nice strikeout rate last year as well. I'm sorry, not last year, but over the course of his career, he has a nice strikeout rate. He's been pitching very well. Hasn't given up an earned run in either of his last two starts. So I mean, he's got a lot of things going in his favor. Low ownership, upside. What's your take on Cashner tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I like all of those things. Like you said, he's going to be low owned for sure. I think Hernandez and Greinke are going to be the two highest owned pitchers today by far.
Okay.
So, assuming people are on Greinke a ton, like you said, that means Cashner is going to be very low owned. I mean, there's a lot of good GPP plays out here today because outside of those top two guys I mentioned, I think Kazmir could be pretty heavily owned here too. There's one other guy I was looking at. Oh, Zimmerman will probably be a decently owned guy, especially at his DraftKings price. I think he's only 8,300 or something like that.
Yeah.
So feels like he'll be a little bit high owned. So there's going to be a lot of ways you can go in GPPs here. A higher owned guy that I like is Kazmir. I think he's going to be a solid play against Houston today. I like the other side of that game though too. Kuchel is a guy that I don't know how many innings we're going to get out of him, but I think he's got a nice upside for 7,500 on DraftKings. Has a decent price on FanDuel also. Latos is another guy. He's an underdog today, kind of like Cashner, that has some decent strikeout upside. Pitching on the other side of that game from Zimmerman, so he's an interesting guy also.
Yeah, and I think both sides of the Cleveland-Detroit game are interesting for GPPs. You got Salazar with that enormous strikeout upside. I think he's a much better play on DraftKings where he's $7,700 compared to 81 on FanDuel. Plus, strikeouts more heavily weighted there on DraftKings. He's a guy that has been wild at times. Only walked two guys in his first start, so that's encouraging. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen it before where he just has those awful innings. And Shane Green, terrible against lefties last year. But the Indians aren't really hitting anyone right now. So I think a lot of people will be scared off him due to that matchup. But a lot of these guys, the lefty mashers for the Indians, really struggling early on. So Shane Green has been very efficient, so I really don't mind targeting him in tournaments, but he'd be a single bullet type of guy for me.
Yeah, definitely has a nice win upside too with the way Detroit's swinging the bats right now.
Yeah.
Another guy that kind of falls into that category is Pineda. The Yankees have been swinging him pretty well. I think he's a decent favorite in this one. Has some decent strikeout upside. You're probably going to get 6 innings out of him, it looks like. I like him a little bit too. Like we said, there's a lot of really solid GPP options pitching-wise on this slate.
Yeah. Well, one other guy I want to mention before we move on is Garrett Richards. Mostly on FanDuel because the win is so heavily weighted. He's a -180 favorite against Wandy Rodriguez and $8,500 there. We saw his stuff at the beginning of last year. I mean, the guy was borderline unhittable there for a little while before he left with that unfortunate injury. But, I mean, doesn't look like he's completely back after just one start, but obviously a very, very small sample size. Now he gets a Texas lineup that, outside of Prince Fielder, hasn't been hitting the ball at all. So I like his upside a lot tonight.
Yeah, I like that too.
All right, let's move on here to catcher, where in cash games I will be certainly saving money wherever I can at catcher today. But in GPPs, I think the contrarian way to go is probably going to be paying up. Buster Posey is going to be really popular, of course, hitting in Coors Field. He's expensive. He's $5K on DraftKings, $44 on FanDuel. So I don't think he makes for a great GPP play because everyone will be on him. I think Stephen Vogt's the guy. He's in a pitcher's park. Doesn't have a particularly great matchup. He's been swinging a nice bat right now early in the season. So I think he makes for a nice GPP play at $3,600.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, catcher's just such a weak position today. It's really, really rough. There's a lot of good pitchers on the mound. Not a lot of catchers hitting very high in the order, like you mentioned. I I mean, I'm not really even sure what way I'm going to go here outside of Posey. It's going to be really tough. I mean, it almost makes sense, as much as I hate to say it, to just take Posey and save a little bit elsewhere, even in GPPs. That's definitely going to be my strategy in cash games today. But Carlos Santana is a guy that I think is a decent GPP play today. Like you mentioned, Shane Green, not good against lefties. Santana's been the one Cleveland guy I've been trying to use a little bit more often. I really like his power upside, but that whole lineup's been struggling a ton. Yeah. So it makes it a little tough.
There's one other guy that I'm going to throw in here that he's got a great price on FanDuel at $3,000, but hitting well. Usually hits sixth, facing off against Matt Garza, who has not been himself this year. He's looking his age now, really been getting hit hard. And Yadi Molina at $3,000 on FanDuel, 39 on DraftKings. Like I said, he usually hits six, so it's not an ideal lineup. But, I mean, as far as pure talent, I mean, he's by far the best hitter around that price tag at catcher.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. One other guy I was looking at, well, two other guys in the 3,000s on DraftKings that I was looking at were Russell Martin and A.J. Pierzynski. I mean, there's just not a lot to like. I don't feel good about either one of them. They're both hitting like 6, 7 in the order. I mean, there's just
been hot though, at least.
Yeah, I played him on I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, and he had a nice game. I mean, he's just not a guy you get excited about. But there really aren't any catchers to get excited about besides Posey, so I guess that's a problem everyone's going to have today.
If DraftKings will add bonuses for home plate collisions, then AJ Pierzynski could be my lineup every single day. But yeah, like we said, it's a really weak position. So if you're unsure about it, go ahead and pay for Posey. He's in a good spot against the guy who walks a ton of batters. He hasn't looked particularly well. Doesn't strike anyone out in Eddie Butler. So yep. Moving on here to first base. And here's a place where there's a ton of options. It's obviously the opposite of catcher. Anthony Rizzo against Mike Leake, who really struggled against lefties last year. 352 WOBA allowed in Great American Ballpark. He's probably going to be my favorite of the expensive options on DraftKings. He's $4,800. I like him a lot in tournaments. You may see a little bit of him in cash games as well. He's $4,400 on FanDuel, but I like Anthony Rizzo a lot. And with so many options at first base, it's going to be hard to pinpoint any one guy being really high owned.
Yeah, that's the good thing about such a deep position is, I mean, even if you're taking some of these guys that are in great positions, they're probably not going to be more than 10, 15% owned. Maybe 20 in the case of someone like Rizzo. I think he's the top option also. But, I mean, when you're looking around, you can pay $200 more for Miguel Cabrera. Or, I mean, people are going to be on Brandon Belt because he's at Colorado facing a righty. Paul Goldschmidt's a pretty solid play today. Jose Abreu's facing a lefty. He's $5,400, so he's a really interesting GPP play for me today.
Yeah, really
he's going to be a guy.
Too.
Yeah, he's heating up, facing a lefty, a soft throwing lefty for the most part that I believe he's been pretty good against in his career. I don't think he has that many at bats against him though. 5,400 is going to keep his ownership down for sure, with Posey and Belt below that at Coors. So he's a guy I feel pretty good about, along with Freddie Freeman is another guy that I think is a pretty strong play today at 4,300. I think he's going to be more of a cash game play for me today against Harang, but I feel really good about that 4,300 price if you're looking to save a little money at this position.
Yeah, I like that call as well. And if you're looking elsewhere, I mean, Albert Pujols against Wandy Rodriguez, not in a bad spot. He hasn't been hitting particularly well, but that should drive his ownership level even lower tonight. Not a whole lot to like cheap. A guy that had himself a nice game, hit fifth yesterday. If he's in the lineup, Alex Wood's really been struggling. Darren Ruff is $2,200 on FanDuel, $29 on DraftKings. He's got above average power. Alex Wood's been wild so far this year. He's looking like the Alex Wood that got demoted before. So I don't mind targeting him. If you really are just trying to punt and stack elsewhere, I don't mind him at all.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot else to like it. First base cheap-wise, though. Like you said, Ruff is $2,900. I mean, Ike Davis is still $2,600, but he's facing a lefty in Kuchel today that I just don't feel very good about. Yeah. I mean, he could be a fine punt play, I guess, where you just hope he goes 1 for 4 or whatever. But I'm not really excited about that in GPPs. There's a better chance I'd take that price in cash games, but I'm probably not saving at first base today with all the relatively well-priced, really high upside options at the position.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Joey Votto, despite the tough matchup against John Lester, who hasn't looked good. And Joey Votto can hit anyone anytime. Great against lefties, so that perceived tough matchup, lefty-lefty, isn't going to scare me off. Joey Votto, one of the best in the league against lefties, so I don't mind him at all. Moving on here to second base, where you've got some options like Jason Kipnis. He's at $3,100, a great price on FanDuel. $4,400 on DraftKings. A lefty matching up against Shane Green, 349 WOBA last year. Lefties. He's been much better this season, but I mean, it's been 3 starts. So as we know, this Cleveland team can't hit lefties. They're great against righties in general. So I think this could be a night where they get it turned around.
Yeah, I think so too. Like we mentioned with Green, he's a decent GPP play because of the offense behind him and stuff. But a lot of these Indians guys have great matchups. Neil Walker is a guy that's interesting to me at second base, right around Kipnis there, facing a righty and Cole Mentor. Should be a decent play. D. Gordon's price is way down, but he's facing Zimmerman. I'd probably lean Kipnis or Walker in GPPs because without the power, D. Gordon just doesn't have a ton of upside if he's not stealing the bases. I don't like him that much as a GPP play. Jace Peterson's probably the cheap guy I'm looking at. I like a lot of these Braves guys against Harang today. I think it's going to be a pretty low-owned group of guys. Pretty excited about that as a GPP play. Peterson probably going to hit second, right in front of Freeman, which I mentioned at first base has a great matchup today. I think that's a nice duo you can go after today. There's one other guy that I was looking at. Oh, Altuve against Kazmir. We always like Altuve against lefties. Kazmir's been pretty tough, but I think he's a pretty decent GPP play too. He's going to be low owned at 4,800 on DraftKings. I think he's up over 4,000 on FanDuel also.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. And another guy I want to mention, and he only has second base eligibility on DraftKings, third base on both sites, and that's Martin Prado. Was batting second ahead of Giancarlo Stanton yesterday. I'm not a believer in Jordan Zimmerman right now. He hasn't looked good. His velocity's been down. And Prado, as we know, he's a better hitter against lefties in his career. But at the same time, I think he's going to be in a fine spot tonight, especially if he's hitting ahead of Stanton once again in the 2-hole. I'm going to have a couple Marlin stacks. Worked out well yesterday, and I'm going to go back to it. I mean, the guy's hitting the ball well, and he's got doubles in each of his last 2 games. I mean, I just love that spot with him ahead of Stanton, and I think people will be scared off Jordan Zimmerman too.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, moving on to third base now, where a ton of power, a lot of risky options, but a lot of upside here as well. Chris Bryant, I'm sure we don't need to tell you, he's not going to be a sneaky GPP play by any means. Everyone's going to be on Chris Bryant, I'm sure, in this matchup. So I'm still going to have myself some exposure in GPPs. Not a ton, just because I think he will be really heavily owned. But as we know, he's got immense upside, and when Mike Leake's bad, he just gets crushed. So I'm not going to be avoiding that situation at all. Pedro Alvarez at $4,300, and that's DraftKings specific because he has first base eligibility as well, but he's only first base on FanDuel. He's pretty much home run or bust. Not a good hitter in general, but he's got a ton of power hitting at Chase Field, so I like him also.
Yeah, Casey McGee at Coors is going to be the other probably high-owned guy here at third base. 3,800 on DraftKings. I think he's 3,500 on FanDuel. I mean, that's going to be him and Chris Bryant are probably going to be the 2 highest owned guys, but I don't think their ownership gets crazy today. One guy that I like at a little bit higher price is Chris Davis against Porcello. I haven't really been impressed with Chris Davis recently, but
or Porcello.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there we go. So I feel like Davis is a pretty strong GPP play here. Like I said, we're going to have those 2 pretty high-owned guys at third base, and then it's going to be a bunch of 5-8% guys. So should be pretty strong as far as ownership percentage goes. Cabrera obviously has that third base eligibility at DraftKings, which is awesome. You can feel pretty good about getting 2 first basemen in your lineup if you can play him at third base. I think he'll be one of the higher-owned guys at this corner infield spots just because, I mean, there's not as much at third base and him having that third base eligibility, but him having that eligibility on DraftKings should drive down the ownership percentage of a couple of these other guys we've named so far.
Yeah, absolutely. One more guy I want to mention here, and he has second base and third base eligibility on DraftKings and on FanDuel. He has third base eligibility. Danny Valencia facing off against the lefty today. Drew Smiley, his first start of the season. He was great against lefties in that lefty-lefty matchup last year. Not very good at all against righties. 334 WOBA allowed. And Valencia just absolutely crushes lefties. I'm hoping he gets right around the 5 or 6 spot today in this order. We've seen him as high as second before against a lefty. So I absolutely love him. He's $2,700 on DraftKings, which is a ridiculously low price. Only $25 on FanDuel. And he legitimately is one of the better platoon guys against lefties in the game. So I'll get myself a ton of cheap exposure to Danny Valencia tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I'm getting really annoyed by that problem with the Toronto stack, though, with Smoke and Edwin Jackson both being first base only because I want to stack that team so often.
Yep.
And Smoke's right in the middle of that right now because I actually like Donaldson quite a bit too.
He's hot.
Yeah, exactly. Donaldson hitting 3, Edwin Jackson hitting 4. I think Smoke hit what, 5th yesterday.
Yep.
I think Valencia's been in the middle of that too. I don't know what I'm going to do with that, but I like a lot of these guys against the lefty Smiley today. So I like Toronto as a under the radar stack a little bit here, especially with the price on Valencia and if Steve Tolison's in the lineup too. I think he's only 2,100 with second base, third base eligibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And those Toronto bats, like you mentioned, in really great spots, and especially Josh Donaldson. I mean, he's a guy who has just absolutely destroyed lefties. I mean, if you were someone who played DFS last year or even watched baseball last year, I mean, he was just tremendous against lefties. I'm trying to grab his video game numbers here real quick. But I mean,
he crushed him last year.
Yeah, let's see. Last year versus lefties, Josh Donaldson, a 353 ISO and a 429 WOBA. Just,
yeah.
I mean, the type of numbers you couldn't replicate if you wanted to. Like, those are the kind of numbers where you invent those type of numbers. I mean, it's insane. And he's the 14th most expensive guy on DraftKings at third base.
Yeah, exactly. He's a great play.
Yeah, absolutely love that. He's a little bit pricier, comparatively speaking, on FanDuel, where he's the third most expensive at 43. But I'm with you there. I mean, he's got monster upside against the lefty. And Smiley making his first start, he made some strides late last season, kind of improved a little bit. But, I mean, he's still not a great pitcher. He's a guy you can definitely beatable. And I think a lot of people will be off the Toronto bats because they're not at home, away from the Rogers Center. So I think that could keep their ownership levels down, too.
Yep.
All right. Kyle Seager, I guess I'll mention him in passing. He's at home against a righty. And Phil Hughes, a fly ball pitcher, contact pitcher, so I think he's not in a bad spot either, but not a guy I'm going out of my way to play, though.
Yeah, same.
All right, shortstop, as it usually is, pretty ugly today. Not a lot of great options. Troy Tulowitzki, obviously your most expensive option, $5,200 on DraftKings. His FanDuel price is $51. Going against a ground ball pitcher, and Tulowitzki, I mean, I'm not going to say he's bad. I mean, he's batting .300, but he hasn't been Troy Tulowitzki so far this season. I mean, he went over 4 yesterday with a couple strikeouts. He struck out actually 5 times in his last 11 at-bats. So that's not to say fade Troy Tulowitzki, but at this point, he's facing a righty at home. He's better against lefties, and he's a ground ball pitcher. So he's not a guy that I'm going to be making sure I have a ton of exposure to. If I don't have any Troy Tulowitzki tonight, any homers, I'll get over it because I'm not going to be paying his price tag.
Yeah, that's understandable. There's a decent amount of shortstop options, I think. No one that really jumps out at you, but I think there's a lot of playable guys. We mentioned D. Gordon at second base against Zimmerman is okay. Not as much a GPP play. Jose Reyes is the guy I probably like a little bit more here at shortstop. Only 4,000 on DraftKings. On the turf in Tampa Bay, like we said, we like a lot of the guys in the middle of that order, which is good for him if he gets on base. I'll probably have a lot of Reyes and GPPs unless someone else emerges here because, I mean, Joe Panik's at Colorado, but for 100 more, I think I'd rather have Reyes, honestly.
Yeah, and he's only 36 on FanDuel also, so great price.
Yeah, right. So you're looking pretty good there. If you're not playing Cashner and GPPs, Jimmy Rollins is okay at 3,500. His price is sticking around that medium-low price there. Danny Santana against Felix Hernandez is a guy I'm probably not looking at today. He's been a kind of popular guy lately because his price has been really good on both sites with that shortstop eligibility, but I just can't see Minnesota getting it going against Seattle today.
No, I don't either. If you want a little bit of power, I mean, he hasn't shown it much yet this season, just 1 home run, but Ian Desmond against Matt Latos, who's struggled to keep the ball on the ground in a big-time way so far this year. I think he makes for a nice upside play. Pretty pricey, though, as he usually is. He's 44 on DraftKings, 39 on FanDuel. But, I mean, he gives you that power upside that most of these other guys don't possess. So, one other guy who has some power, 3 homers on the year. His price jacked up on DraftKings, of course, due to playing in Coors Field. But Brandon Crawford at $4,400. We know he's got some power. He usually hits 7, so you don't love that. But $3,000 on FanDuel there against the pitcher has really struggled. There should be some base runners on when he comes up. As we know, Eddie Butler's really struggled with walks. Doesn't strike anyone out. So I think Brandon Crawford makes for a really nice GPP, and he could be the forgotten guy in those Coors Field stacks tonight.
Yeah, I like that too.
All right, other guys, if you want some power, Johnny Peralta, already mentioned Matt Garza, hasn't looked great. He bats fifth. He's got a fair price tag, $4,000 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he's at $2,800. Wow, I didn't even realize the price was that good. So
yeah,
$2,800 is a nice price for him there too.
Yep, definitely.
All right, I'll mention a few more guys here. Joe Panik is a guy who's going to be batting second. Doesn't have a lot of power upside, but like I mentioned, I mean, if Eddie Butler gets crazy, there should be RBI opportunities. He bats second, should get some at-bats. He's $3,900 on DraftKings. FanDuel, he's listed at second base, and he's $2,800. Anybody else at shortstop you like?
Not really. I think we've covered pretty much everyone. There's a lot of playable options. No one that really stands out for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm going to be bargain bin hunting later on, see if I can get someone in a good spot, a cheap lineup spot maybe for one of these shortstops tonight. Moving on to the outfield, this guy also has third base eligibility, and it's not that he's going to be low owned, but he is the cheapest playable player on the board is Jimmy Paredes. Again, just $2,000. Assuming that he's hitting second, he's an easy way to get yourself some cheap exposure to that game and also help fit some Felix Hernandez and some other big bats, big pitchers in your lineup too. Yeah,
definitely. There's actually a lot of really low-priced outfielders today if you want to save in the outfield and pay up at some of these other positions, maybe even pitcher. Jeff Francoeur is a guy we mentioned a couple times. He's still sitting at $2,200, facing a lefty in Wood today. Obviously, he strikes out a lot. There's a lot of downside with him, but there's a decent amount of upside getting a 4-hitter for $2,200, like you just mentioned with a 2-hitter. Another really cheap guy is Pablo Orlando. He's bare minimum at $2,000. He hit 8th last night, though. He is facing a lefty today. I don't know if he'll hit any higher due to that, but just another really, really cheap option. Yeah. Colin Cowgill, $2,600, facing Rodriguez, a lefty. I mean, that's not a bad play either. There's a lot of really cheap outfield plays today, and there's not really a lot of high-priced guys that I'm excited about like I was on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, Elian Herrera is another guy who's cheap. He's $2,600. He's facing off against Carlos Martinez, and we know the Brewers' bats have been cold, but he does bat second right ahead of Braun and company, so should have some run-scoring opportunities, and he's got a nice price tag on FanDuel as well at $2,400. I mean, he shows some power. I mean, he hit a grand slam in his first start. You're obviously not expecting that very often, but I mean, he's shown that he's got some pop in his bat too, and he's really cheap. So I like getting some guys with a little bit of power at that price.
Yeah, definitely.
David DeJesus, if you just want a cheap guy, but he doesn't have much upside, he's $2,600. He's not terrible. Talking about a couple expensive options here, since we're going to have to talk about some expensive options. Corey Dickerson's going to be really high owned at $5,300. Maybe the highest owned player at any position tonight. And, I mean, I don't blame you for playing him, and I'll be playing him some, but he's not a must-play at that price tag, I don't think, at $5,300. Some other guys, I really like Giancarlo Stanton's price tag on DraftKings at $4,800. He's going against Jordan Zimmerman, who already said I'll be picking on tonight. I don't think he just hasn't looked right, and the Marlins offense starting to get it going. Stanton's got 4 home runs, I believe, in his past 6 games. So Stanton's finally starting to get it going. That whole lineup just finally clicking. They scored 9 runs last night, obviously against the Phillies. But, you know, if Jordan Zimmerman doesn't have his best stuff here, then Miami can jump on him in a hurry.
Yeah, definitely. You talked a little bit about Dickerson is a pretty high price. I like Trout as a GPP play. If you're fading Dickerson, only $5,400 on DraftKings, facing a lefty. Feel pretty good about Trout tonight, but you can feel pretty good about Trout most nights. So
yeah.
Don't have a lot to say there that's anything new. Bryce Harper, another guy that we've been talking about basically every day, only $4,400 on DraftKings still, facing a righty Latos. Got to feel good about that play also.
Michael Brantley is another guy. He's got a great price tag on FanDuel. He's $3,800 on FanDuel, $4,700 on DraftKings. We mentioned Shane Green's struggles against lefties last year. Like we said, been marginally better this year, but I'm not a firm believer that he's just all of a sudden going to dominate lefties. And if that Cleveland offense gets it going, I mean, Brantley's the guy who struggled so far this season, but, I mean, we've seen his upside. I mean, he put up monster numbers last year. He can steal bases. He can hit the ball. I mean, he's got power, so I like him a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. Lorenzo Cain, the guy that started the season red hot, facing a lefty, and Quintana. He's okay.
Wasn't much of a fighter last night either.
No, he wasn't.
I was kind of expecting big things out of that. I mean, I saw that there was a fight. I turned it on real quick, and I don't know. I was pretty disappointed in Robin Ventura in general, as he does. He kind of stays out of fights now, right?
Yeah, I saw the 2 Sox guys that got thrown out were both pitchers that weren't even pitching, so yeah, that was nice.
Ventura probably just didn't want to be have another YouTube video of him getting beat up by an old man. Nelson Cruz is the guy I want to mention too. He's 4,500 on DraftKings. Got a nice price there. On FanDuel, he's a little bit more pricey. He's at 5,100. But like we mentioned, Phil Hughes, a fly ball pitcher. It's obviously pitcher's park, but when Nelson Cruz gets a hold of a ball, it really doesn't matter where he's hitting. I mean, the ball, he crushes the ball. And that $4,500 price tag, I mean, we know he's got double dong upside against anyone. So I like him as a tournament play. I think he'll be a guy that flies under the radar, especially with Game & Course.
Yeah, we can talk about a couple stacks here while we got a couple extra minutes.
Yeah.
A low-owned one that I kind of like today is Baltimore against Porcello. De Aza should be nice against the righty. Obviously, Adam Jones has been really hot. Steve Pearce is a guy that I like a lot of nights. He should be a pretty strong play today. I think he had the day off yesterday, which should be good.
Yep.
That's a pretty strong stack for me. I feel pretty good about that one, being low-owned.
I like the Pirates as a cheap stack here, too.
Yeah, McCutcheon's an interesting play today on his own, too.
Yeah.
There's nothing really... Yeah, there's nothing that really, like, jumps out a ton for you about Pittsburgh, but I think they're just, like, a really strong play against Cole Mentor, and the stack is relatively cheap on both sites. Really, no one's going crazy as far as price. I mean, McCutcheon's up there on DraftKings, not too bad on FanDuel, but that's really the only expensive guy you have to worry about in that stack.
Yeah, that's true. Some other lower-owned stacks, I don't mind the Cubs or the Reds. Mike Leake hasn't been great. John Lester has actually been awful. The Reds tagged him for six earned runs in 6 innings last time, and that was in Chicago. We know Cincinnati's a bandbox, so Lester, if he doesn't get it going today, the Reds probably going to be under-owned once again due to the name factor with John Lester. And that's not even a homer call. I mean, a lot of these guys hitting the ball pretty well, so I don't mind that stack either side really.
Right. The Yankees are kind of an interesting under-the-radar one against DeGrom. I actually like DeGrom a little bit today as a GPP play, I guess, but I think the Yankees have a decent group of lefties and switch hitters against them today that'll be interesting with Gardner hitting near the top. I think Beltran will probably be in the lineup again today. Teixeira has been hitting the ball decent. Probably not a really heavily owned stack. That's going to be a really low owned one.
Yeah.
I think you'll be okay with that.
I do think the Marlins will be my favorite stack because I just don't think Jordan Zimmermann has it. I mean, last two starts, he struck out 3 guys and walked 4. His fly ball rate is just as high as his ground ball rate this year. He's getting hit hard, and that Marlins lineup, I mean, even Hechavarria last night, 4 hits in the 8 hole. So, I mean, they're producing top to bottom right now. They have a lot of capable hitters in that lineup. So that's going to be a stack that I play that I'm hoping is pretty low owned, and I think it should be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's going to be a lot of low owned stacks today. It's going to be a fun night, especially for these like mid stakes GPPs and stuff where people can do all kinds of crazy stuff with the amount of entries. This is probably the most fun GPP night we've had yet this season, I think.
Yeah.
Because like you said at the beginning of the show, there's not a lot to love in cash games where you can just be like, okay, I can just lock that guy in my lineup. Where it's been like that a lot, but with the Giants playing in Coors and with Tulowitzki and Carlos Gonzalez struggling, I mean, you can't just really stack that game right now, especially with that game being 2-1 yesterday. I mean, it's going to be an interesting night for sure.
Yeah, I do think Coors will still be lower owned than usual, but I mean, people still like to blindly just stack that. And I mean, yes, Butler's been bad, but Chris Heston's actually been pretty damn good, 62% ground ball rate so far. So I'm not saying avoid the guy. But, I mean, he did face this same Colorado team. Obviously, it was in San Francisco, but mowed him down. I mean, 7 innings. He gave up 1 earned run, had 5 Ks, 13 ground ball outs to 4 fly ball outs. So,
yep.
Obviously, you're going to get more elevation on the ball in Coors Field. But you want a really crazy GPP play, throw Chris Heston in your GPP and stack a ton of hitters with them on DraftKings. He's 40.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So There's your last crazy call of the day right there. Chris Heston.
I like that. I might do that now.
Yeah, I mean 4,900. I mean even if he gives up 4 runs but gets you 5-6 Ks, $4,900. He's cheaper than what? Probably 20 hitters.
Yeah, at least I think on DraftKings for sure.
Yeah, so there's my crazy call today. But that'll wrap things up for us here. Thanks for hanging out with us. Follow us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Check out all of our great content for tonight's slate at dailyfantasycafe.com. We'll see you guys tomorrow.